Welcome to Rethink Gaming's Think, Rethink, Play podcast with Bob McDowell, Jerry Perkle, and this week's guest, David Lee.
And today's topic is three men named Gary, but not Gygax.
If you want to support this content, please consider joining us on Patreon. Subscribers get a special role on our Discord server, access to all of our content, and a chance at seats at our subscriber-only tables. Today's topic is playing in character, and we're going to be doing some demonstrations. But first, let's do our introductions.
Who are you?
I'm Bob. I'm a role playing guru of sorts. I've taught many people how to do it, and I've been doing it for a very long time. I'm a content creator at Rethink Gaming. I try to do my best to keep up with Jerry's excellent work, and I'm currently running 3 weekly Dungeons and Dragons games because COVID has made me crazy.
It wasn't COVID. That's a lie. It was that way before. Anyways, I'm Jerry. I'm a professional dungeon master, Bob. I believe that people pay me to dungeon master for them. At RPG Dungeons, I also write content for Rethink Gaming. We release mostly on the DM's Guild right now. And yeah, our special guest is an A-list actor. Is that right, David? A-list?
I'm on A-list.
You're on a list, so you're
Okay.
a list actor. Okay.
I like it. I like it.
Yeah. Where to start? So yes, as they've said, my name is David Lee. I've been pursuing acting on some kind of professional level for the last roughly 10 years. Currently, I live out in Los Angeles, trying to do the whole like step it up and make it a career thing. We'll see how that goes. It feels like progress is being made. It's all progress that can't really be seen at the moment, but it feels like things are moving. And that's all you can really say until, somebody says, hey, we'd like you to be the lead on a show and hand you a very large contract.
If it's on IMDb, it's official, right?
To some degree, yes. But it's actually not that hard to get a project of any level on IMDb. Figure out the steps for submitting your project. So even things as small as say like a 9-10 minute student project can end up on IMDb. But it's still great because at least that way it's a semi-verifiable way to point to a credit you may have and go, look, I actually did this thing. I'm not just making it up. As far as gaming goes, I've done a little bit of both. I'm majority of the time when I play, I'm a player. I have run some campaigns in the past. Bob was actually my first GM, so he broke me in on the old school Star Wars game system, and then ended up transitioning shortly after that to a game called Earth Dawn, which is the main thing I've ever played in my history. Something about Earth Dawn really clicked for me. At one point in time, I had a majority of the books and material that were ever published for it, and that was that's the main system I've ever used if I've run.
Yeah, I seem to remember there was some confusion about what happens to a lizard man's tail if it's directly in front of the cannon.
That was less about confusion and more about... It was not confusion about what happens, it was more about confusion of whether the tail was actually in front of the cannon or not.
It's fine, they grow back, right?
Sure.
They do. I don't know. It was not actually in front of the cannon, but it's neither here nor there.
Tonight we're sitting down to talk about role-playing, specifically because just from a good citizen perspective of like, I play role-playing games and I show other people how to do it, I firmly believe that how you role-play is as important as the character you pick. You can pick a great character and play it poorly. You can pick a just terrible character, like a 3-word character idea, and make that into some kind of epic and awesome thing.
I'll buy that.
Now, for the people who may just be tuning in, and if so, you've missed 5 or 6 really good podcasts, so go back and listen to those. Or for the people who maybe don't know what on earth we're talking about, in which case, welcome and come learn to game with us. I do have some excerpts from the books. What I like to do is go and dust off these books because, they used to make these things out of paper with words on them that we used to read. And in here are all of the wonderful sort of guidelines for how to do this thing. And the old books, I think, are the best because back then it was... Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you didn't have these preconceived notions, right? So they felt like they had to explain it.
That's exactly right. And I think that gets skipped a lot these days. And I think maybe people don't quite land on the same page when that happens, right? You say, "Oh, I know what a role playing game is. I played Knights of the Old Republic. I get that, right?" Well, no, not quite. So we said not Gygax, but I'm actually going to start with the AD&D Player's Guide from 1978. Under the section "The Game," it talks about as a role player, you become Falstaff the fighter. You know how strong, intelligent, wise, healthy, dexterous, and relatively speaking, commanding a personality you have. Details as to your appearance, your body proportions, and your history can be produced by you or the dungeon master. You act out the game as this character, staying within your God-given abilities and molded by your philosophical and moral ethics called alignment. You interact with the fellow role players not as Jim and Bob and Mary, who work in the office together, but as Falstaff the fighter, Angor the cleric, and Philmar the mistress of magic. I think it definitely sets up a framing there that's like you are not playing a character as a pawn around a board game. You're taking on a role. Next, the GURPS book, third edition, this is the 89, has a pretty cool segment on what is role playing. And here it says part of the object of a role playing game is to have each player meet the situation as the character would. Emphasis character. A role playing game can let a player take the part of a stern Japanese samurai, a medieval jester, a wise priest, a stowaway gutter kid on her first star trip, or absolutely anything else. In a given situation, those characters would react differently. And that's what role playing is about, right? So this kind of gets into the concept of what would my character do, which can be a dirty word, but we're not going there tonight. And then the third really good treatment of this is from the original Star Wars game, the D6 one printed in 87. It's got a whole segment on playing a role, and it talks about things like playing a role can be a lot of fun. Before you begin, give some serious thought as to what your character is like. Read over the background on his character template and try to figure out some of the details in your mind. Try to imagine yourself as your character. How does he talk? How does he think? What does he like to do? And what does he think is a bore? Why has he joined the rebellion? What is his ultimate goal? How does he react to the other player characters? And it digs in on that a little bit too. It says, think about your character's feelings for the other player characters. Is he impressed? Contemptuous? Does he like them? Not care? Friendly? Envious? Act accordingly.
Okay. So, a quick question for David on that. How do you think that's different from acting or how you approach
Um,
acting?
it's not actually that different at all, um, because a lot of acting, and this is something that I it seems to be a topic I'm find is coming up a lot for me. Is is being specific about what you're doing, and it's kind of a little bit different. You know, the great thing about role playing is you are the person who's in charge of building this character. You know, you get to decide what makes you angry, what doesn't, um, what you will and won't fight for, all this other stuff. Really, the only difference between that and acting is you're making the same kinds of decisions, but you then also have to make sure that those decisions line up with all the information that you've been given so far. You know, if you're reading through the description of a character and however much of the script you have available to you for, an audition, and you make something that's just a out of left field kind of decision and decides like, ooh, when I say this line, this kind of comment really makes me angry, but it's not supported or called for whatsoever. Well, then odds are they're not going to call you in. They're not going to call you back. It's like, no, we won't be hiring you this time. Um,
Sure. So that's kind of a big difference, right? You're interpreting a character rather than creating a character from nothing. So I guess it's
it's
its own challenge there, right?
yeah, it's kind of they're separate but equal. Those no, they're two sides of the same coin. You know, on one you've got a blank slate to work with. Feel free to choose anything. Um, Whereas the other one is you've got pre-existing material, so you have to go through and find everything that's already there, and then anything that isn't comes from you. And there's not necessarily a good or bad choice. You just need to make a choice, and it should, the more specific you can make it, the more fleshed out your character slash performance will be.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think
Yeah.
really that's what the old game systems tried to do with things like alignment. Sort of establish those fence posts. Gotten pretty far from that these days, but I think that's why they made you pick that early, and why classes were tied to it, like that
Mhm.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, in terms of how we got to this topic and why we named it the Three Garys, this is actually Jerry's creation and idea. Jerry,
I take no responsibility for this. This is not my fault. No.
tell us how you got us here, Jerry.
Yeah, so I'd taken a nice long break from playing role playing games. Just moved away from my local comic shop and couldn't find a good group. Ended up playing with some coworkers who were playing the sword and sorcery system, and the way that this table played was zero role playing at all. Right? People had pre-planned their actions, so which was good for a large group because it moved a little more quickly. But I mean, they would pre-roll before their turn even came, right? And to me, like that's not the fun part of role playing, right? Like the tactical, the mechanical crunching. Like I know a lot of people love it. It's not my thing. And then after that, I got moved to playing with Bob actually as a player in a very short-lived campaign. But we kind of took a break, and in between two separate campaigns, I volunteered to run uh, a one shot. And instead of just writing my story down, telling a story, I decided I was going to make my own role playing system. Right, kind of very simplified mechanics, one page. The numbers didn't matter as much as the role playing, and to emphasize that, I created a mechanic which we'll get into a little bit later. But it's because simply, I think combat's boring and role playing is fun. Right? So it was done to emphasize the parts of the games.
Yeah, yeah, and it really kind of shined because in that specific system there was a direct mechanical benefit for role playing well. So I had the privilege of playing through this campaign in its first iteration, and then Jerry ran it again, Drinking with Paul crew, I think they're called. And there was a rotating spot for this berserker that ate magic mushrooms, and that's about as much as I knew. But
Mhm.
it was rotating spot because the guy was insane enough that the change in personality made sense, right? So I knew that I was coming into this scenario. I knew that there was like this incentive for strong role playing, and I leaned super hard into just about the only thing I knew was that this guy believed in magic mushrooms. So my first stop over on my way to guest star as this character was at the grocery store, and I bought me a package of Baby Bell mushrooms. I brought them to the table. I opened them, and every time it was appropriate, the character ate a mushroom. I ate the mushroom. The mushrooms whispered to me. There was a part of the adventure where we were all to nominate who we thought should be the leader. And my character gave an impassioned speech and kind of got everybody going and nominated that the leader should be the mushrooms because they tell us the right thing to do. Um, super leaned hard into that, just mostly for comedic effect. But yeah, that whole idea sort of set that stage, made that easy. It's just a weird idea.
Yeah, that was a really fun project. And Paul Dollar from Drink with Paul is like a childhood friend of mine. He was definitely there, but the project was called The Dungeon, called OBF. It's a One Big Family. The YouTube channel, lots of crazy weird videos. And yeah, we filmed the entire campaign basically. I don't know, 6. But yeah, it actually resulted in some really great role playing, right? I was really kind of pushing.
So outside of artificial systems that cause you to take this, David, you do this for a living, or have chosen to do this for a living. What led you in that direction?
Um, how best to condense this story? Essentially, it was I reached a point of self-reflection in my early 30s, where I kind of realized that acting was something that had always been present in through much of my life. Like I'd done a little bit of it in high school, did a little bit of it, did a little bit of community theater, and then took a big break because life got in the way and I made some poor money decisions. Reflection was largely caused by going and was just looking around, examining my life, looking for some kind of who am I and what go to work and hang out with my friends. Like landed on acting as something as a direction to move in first, and then that movement seemed to be supported by just kind of life in general, if that makes sense. Like started with one project and it snowballed from there. Community theater and being involved in things like improv classes, branching out into doing little short film projects and even commercials was always a great and positive experience. And it was just like this is great. I could, regardless of whether I get paid or not, this is something I could pursue in one way, shape, or another.
That's awesome.
Getting paid for it is really, really fun. Even though it's been a little bit since I've been paid for a job, but some of that is just the nature of kind of trying to jump up a level in the type of market that I'm competing in.
Sure.
For lack of a for use of a sports metaphor, I am essentially trying to compete, at at the top professional, NFL, Major League, NHL level. And there are thousands of people who are as attractive, not attractive, talented, or less so than I am. And so many times when it comes to getting a role, whether it be for a simple little commercial or what ends up being the next, cult favorite blockbuster movie or hit, television show, there's only so much that you, the actor, can control. You can prepare for the audition as best as you can and go, when the time comes, you do your best work, and if they like it, great, and if they don't like it, some of that rarely has anything to do with you. It might just be, it's like, no, that, it's like he was good, but that's not, he doesn't look anything like I picture that character. I used to
Yeah,
tell
that's got
friends
to
all
be
the time.
tough.
I used to tell friends all the time, it could be, you could have, pick an Oscar, your favorite Oscar winning actor or actress, and they could go in and audition for a role or be being considered for a role, and they're just not what the people putting the project together are looking for. And, their ability at that moment doesn't matter because they're just, they just don't match the vision that they have in their mind, what they're looking for. And so a lot of what you do as an actor is just accepting that, like, your job is to do the best, put together the best performance that you can. And hopefully, regardless of whether you get hired, you've impressed someone with your ability or with your approach, or, essentially you've made a fan in that process and you've made an impression so that it's like, oh, yeah, I like that person. It's like, they're not right for this, but hopefully, something comes my way and I can hire them in the future.
Yeah, a lot of people do that in professional circles. I was just doing some recruiting by proxy for somebody I knew in the technology space today. It's like, Bob, you're the only person I know who would know somebody. Yeah, I could see how definitely when you're finding talent, especially like you said, if you've got a specific person in mind before you cast it, um, like they need to look this way or behave that way or whatever the criteria might be, you would definitely want to get to know all these different. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And also, if you're doing a movie or television that's been converted from other media, right? So making a movie from a book, a lot of people have a very strong picture of what they think a character should be like. And if you don't fit it, you don't fit it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's very true. And sometimes, what's great about acting in general, there are plenty of stories where somebody has essentially done something, they've made a unique or specific enough choice that was just kind of their take on the material, and it's been unique enough that it has sometimes you know sometimes the people making the decisions, they get their minds changed because they see something great or unique in a performance that they weren't expecting. Essentially say, I didn't know I was looking for that. You're the person I need for this now.
yeah, that I can completely relate to as a dungeon master because we do that stuff all the time. I was just giving some advice online the other day. I said, knowing what's going on is not the trick to being a good dungeon master. The appearance that you know what's going on, that's the secret, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I have found when it comes to what little I've DM'd, the more I can apply what's a improv performing principle called yes and, which essentially means that you're not really looking to keep your party from doing one thing or another. You're kind of like feeding them bits of info or prompts, and if they decide they want to go, it's like, yes, we can definitely go in that direction, and then figuring out what you can do as the GM to either use that to get them to where you want them to ultimately be, or it's like, that's not where I wanted them to go at all, but now I can like find something else to throw at them, or a new way to kind of mess with them and create some adventure.
Yeah.
That's interesting that you touched that actually, because that's very similar to how I've been writing my ongoing campaign, right? I have to plan for a 5 hour session, right? We're gonna play whether I've planned for what they're gonna do or not, right? So one of the things I've been doing is I plan situations, but I don't plan the outcome, right? I throw that softball, I have no idea where it's gonna go. That
Yeah,
doesn't matter, right?
and I have definitely
So
made the mistake of planning the outcome and being too attached to it, and those are some of the
mhm,
sessions where I just sit there as a GM and just like struggle to like get things
yeah.
going, and I can almost feel it in the players, just kind of like the boredom and the kind of lack of engagement, and it's awful, and it makes me not want to run anymore.
So yeah, have those scenarios or those, what I call curiosities in your pocket, right? I'll give one from the very last session actually. I have these things called curiosities where I have nothing planned for it, right? It's just a weird thing to distract the player. So if I run kind of one of these encounters and they do something super weird, I need to plan for it. I just throw them this curiosity, this kind of short encounter. And this one was, you're walking along this trail and you see the remains of a giant on the side of the road. It looks like it's fallen from a great height, far higher than a tree. There's no mountains around, there's no cliffs around. What's going on? And players will chew that up for 30, 45 minutes, and it allows you to kind of, go back and figure out where you're actually going. And what was the answer to that scenario, right? Hope the players aren't listening because I have no idea, right? I had a conversation with them as an NPC. I was like, I don't know, maybe a dragon picked him up and threw him. I got no idea because I actually had no idea. It was just a distraction.
Yeah,
So
Yeah.
those are great.
yeah, little tricks like that can kind of save you from yourself when it comes to railroading players, right? We've already done a podcast on this. I think. Have we done a podcast on railroading?
Yeah. We called it
Is that a
agency,
thing?
but you bet.
Yeah. So yeah, don't do that.
Yeah, yeah,
So that's
I I find that that concept, especially when applied to say small items that come from say some bizarre vendor along the road, in a town that your heroes are
mhm.
have just stepped into, you can create just a bizarre enough, individual with this item. It could almost be, essentially it's like, oh, you've bought this armor, but it's like, you're good folk. Let me also give you this bottle. I think you'll find that good fortune comes to those that possess this bottle, and you do it in just enough way that the curiosity, like this, your players as their characters end up going, it's like, wait, what's up with this bottle? Is there something special? And you, the GM, kind of get to sit back and go and see how much effort they're going to put into into researching this, now seemingly innocuous item that has come into their possession. And I've had items that have come into my character's possession like that in the past. It's like, mean anything? Does it belong? It's like, oh, that seemed to heal me. I loaded it with a
Yeah.
liquid for a day, and
I've
yeah, just
literally done
bizarre,
this
fun
as
stuff like
well.
that.
I had the guy instead of a snake oil salesman, he was a traveling basilisk oil salesman riding around on a blind donkey, and they literally killed the guy, or they used the donkey to kill him. But
What is with murderous donkeys in your games, man?
I don't know. It's come up twice in like 3 months, so it's a little weird.
Well, fifth edition does have this page count dedicated to the concept of trinkets. And they appear in a couple of the different modules too. And they're similar to that. I don't think there's quite enough meat on those bones because you'll roll something on one of those charts and go, okay, it's teeth and a bit of string. You know, not a lot of role playing gold there. But yeah, I think it's a good concept. It definitely could use some development.
we've gone to good places, but I feel like we've strayed a little bit, which is totally cool with me. But let's go back around to acting and role playing in D&D and or just in role playing in general, right? And how do we when I made that gaming system, what did I do to reward players? I created something that I call the Gary scale. Nothing to do with Gary Gygax. It was three actors named Gary. You had Gary Busey, Gary Sinise, and Gary Oldman. And you can see the short version of this is if your role playing was up to the standard of Gary Busey, you were getting a penalty. So roll at disadvantage, for example. Gary Sinise, that's the bar. You need to at least do that. No penalty, no bonus. But if you showed truly outstanding role playing, call that Gary Oldman, and you get a bonus. So in this case, advantage on a roll. Can be done anytime, can be voted on by both, dungeon master or players. And yeah, it's mechanically it kind of breaks a game, right? If you're rolling at advantage all the time, but it enhances
I do want to pause here for just a minute and apologize to Mr. Busey, who I'm certain at some point will be a fan of this podcast. Um, but in doing the research to put this together, Gary Busey is on the Howard Stern show saying, and I quote, "No acting required." Right. So I'm sorry, sir. I think it's fair.
Yeah, and it's not really a dig, to be honest with you, right? It's just if you're gonna make a scale with three actors named Gary, he's on the bottom, right? Gary Sinise, again, is it even fair to say that, that actor is kind of like standard middle, no bonus, no penalties, whatever? Not really. He's a good actor, right? But, nothing compared to Gary Oldman.
Yeah, and I
Personal opinion.
did some research on Mr. Sinise as well, right? Going,
Mhm.
okay, what is his process? What does he do? I couldn't find where he talked about it. If he did, it was completely overshadowed by his work with veterans and other things since being on Forrest Gump. All of that he talks about frequently, right? But I could not see where
Mhm.
he talked about the practice of acting or how he prepared for a role or really anything of that nature. But now Gary Oldman, on the other hand, as Jerry pointed out to me, has an entire Wikipedia page for the awards he's been nominated.
I'm a big fan.
Yeah, oh, me too. My favorite role has got
Anybody?
to be the Zorg in Fifth Element.
Ah,
Mm.
yes, absolutely.
Leon the Professional. He played the police chief. No.
Mm-mm. No, he played
Ooh,
Commissioner Gordon.
Yeah, and even though someone is the same job, it's like such a completely different role. No.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about his process either. The one I do know is a little more famous is Daniel Day-Lewis, right? He lives
Mhm.
in period clothing, limits his vocabulary, um, insists that other people talk to him that way for like weeks on end and just like becomes the person he's about to play. I'm not an actor, but that seems a little extreme.
It definitely is. In his case, it produces some, hard to argue against the quality of the work he's produced, but um, that is a bit exhaustive of an approach, and there are definitely easier methods to use, easier approaches to use.
Yeah, I mean you're absolutely right. You can't argue with those results, but he also retired, right? Because that's got to be completely exhausting. Like I don't think he does movies anymore. So what are your thoughts on the Gary scale, David?
That's a pretty good. I mean, if you're going to use actors named Gary, that's a pretty good summation. And as an actor, there's definitely been times where I've done roles that don't necessarily require the most acting per
Hmm.
se, and yeah, and some slipping into kind of, in my experience anyway, most of my D&D acting slash being the character definitely falls more along the lines of the Gary Sinise style, with a few moments of Gary Oldman splashed in.
Sure.
Most of my, if if anything I've done has moved more towards being somebody completely different. That usually comes from when I've got to play an NPC, whether I'm supporting somebody else's game, doing that, or like, oh, I've decided to run my game and kind of like play as many of my NPCs as possible,
Hmm.
and actually play them instead of just saying, oh, you deal with this merchant or you deal with lord of a town, and
Yeah,
actually
Yeah.
trying to find and remember different voices too. kind of keep that person in.
Oh, I know that's so tough. Like, I actually reached out to David not too long ago on Facebook. Was like, how do you do this? How do you keep them straight in your head? Because yeah, it's a challenge, especially when your accents are as bad as mine.
You can only have so many variations of like a British accent,
Yeah, that's
which is
funny.
what I think a lot of like beginning people's defaults are, at least in my case.
I
Yeah,
kind of like the idea of using, the various American accents as placeholders. Like I imagine like dwarves being like the bells, the southern draw, the Georgia accent. I
yeah,
think
Oh
it would work
wow,
out very well.
that's an interesting thought.
Halflings definitely from California.
yeah. One thing
Yeah.
I like to do shorthand like that is get a face. So I usually run pre-printed modules because, good lord, if I had to create 3 modules in a week, I wouldn't have any time
Mhm.
to do anything else. But I look at the picture, right? If there is one. If there's not one, I'll go find one, make one up. And I stare at the picture while I try to role play this character because I feel like that helps me stay a little bit focused in what they said before and helps me to kind of keep that centered. Um, and, to that end, I just think that if there were like a deck of cards that had multiple faces on it, you could do that with it. It might be an amazing product, but it's just an idea.
So that's a clue of something that we're working on right now. It's good product placement there, Bob.
Yeah, but it can't go too far. I found a made a face for Tomb of Annihilation. It was in that case, it was a makeup artist. I was doing kind of like this undead thing, and the character was like half young, half old, and that picture was so visceral. They murdered that character immediately.
Not immediately.
Well,
Immediately.
pretty close.
Yeah, well, it happens. I feel attacked now because my bard drowned this old woman.
It's probably the only murder hobo thing you did in the entire campaign. You're like, nope, she
Yeah.
doesn't get to live.
Yeah. I mean, it was like actual evil.
Yeah.
She was stealing like body parts from her granddaughter or something. It was awful. Yeah.
Yeah.
No spoilers.
No
That model's
spoilers.
been out for a couple of years. You can get over it.
It's not a major character either. Comment in
Yeah.
the comments below wherever you find this. It'll help the algorithm complain at us. All right, so it's enough to say we have the scale and it has 3 Garys on it, but we told the people that we would do a little acting here. Role playing, I guess, would probably be the right term for it, not to impugn on people who actually make money doing this. But yeah, so we're going to throw out some scenarios and kind of go back and forth and do some just basic examples of what we feel like would fall into the 3 Gary scales. And remember, it's Gary Busey is, you're just really not trying. Gary Sinise means you're doing a good job. And Gary Oldman's like, wow, great job. So I think we'll start simple and let's do you're buying a new sword.
All right. So yeah, I give the example when I'm kind of explaining this one. You're not acting, you're not trying. So I mean, the simple example here is you're a player, you're sitting there, you're thumbing through the book, and I'm buying the sword, deducting this much gold. We're done. You're not putting anything into it at all.
All right. So if you wanted to put just a little bit of role playing into it, Dave, you want to take a crack at the middle
uh,
path?
sure. So I'm gonna go find me a good merchant. Excuse me, sir. In the market for a new blade.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good pitch, right? It sets the DM to pick a voice and just kind of hop in there. And I frankly almost did. Um, but yeah, yeah,
Yes.
really good, really good. How do we want to approach the Gary Oldman?
One professional actor here. I'm just saying.
Give me a second. Okay,
He's
I got an
coming.
idea. Bob, feel free to be the shopkeeper. I think a little back and forth will help us Oldman this up.
Okay. So you enter a shop. There's an old man sharpening a sword on a whetstone, paying you very little mind.
Excuse me, good sir. Are you the shopkeeper here?
Yes. How can I
Find
help you?
myself. I find myself in need.
Well, blades we got, son. What do you need? Well, quality
We have
don't
fought.
come cheap now.
This blade failed.
Ah, see, I like it. It's steely and cold, and it kind of
Yeah.
tells the shopkeeper, like, do not screw with this guy.
Does cat clapping come through? Yeah, that was awesome, guys.
Okay, and I also want to roll to see if he's got any not like a soft cheese, but like not Parmesan, but like a harder cheese.
I got Gouda. Funny.
Yeah,
But
I mean that was a
I
great
just went with
example right
cheese
there.
because invariably that's how it seems like that's how a lot of my it's hard for me to stay in character in a table, especially in a tabletop or a traditional D&D, with dice and paper kind of setting. I say that because I used to I have definitely spent a lot of time as a LARPer, which having that kind of immersive experience definitely helps up the role playing for most people involved, um, and really brings the like. It's like not only what's great about LARPing is in a good system, not only is the role playing fun, but then the combat is actually fun too because it's not just like and a combat. Now we all wait to take our turn and describe what we're doing and roll dice and see what happens. No, it's like we're swinging and throwing stuff left and right.
LARPing, huh?
Yeah,
That's not something I've ever tried, but there is an organization called the SCA.
I have.
So
I've never actively participated in SCA.
uh-huh.
I've had a good handful of friends over the have done the SCA thing.
Sure, it's the Society for Creative Anachronism. It was founded in I think San Francisco in maybe the 70s. And the local chapter is called the Barony of the Steps here in the Carrollton area. I would be lying if I said I wasn't curiously following them at a good distance because it's a very, interesting idea, but I've never gone down that route.
Yeah, that's kind of a like Civil War reenactment type of role playing.
Hmm.
Whereas there's some role playing in the setting of a feudal time period, but they also are going to be, and there's also some combat built in, which is a bit a bit more extreme in terms of like the contact level that you're dealing with because you're dealing with like actual actual pieces of wood and people are wearing like actual armor, if not somewhat modernized, but they're actually wearing like actual chainmail or pieces of you know pieces of plate mail. And in that setting, that you will get kind of like critiqued or called out if your costuming isn't like up to snuff for the role that you're currently in. One of the big examples I heard of over my understanding, knights were typically signify one of the ways you signify that you're like in the class of a person who's a knight is like you have a white belt, and if you're not a knight you don't get to wear a white belt.
well, when it
And
warms
they
up, Jerry, we're gonna have to go explore this world. That sounds like a
For
podcast
sure.
episode all to itself.
Absolutely. So, just another fun fact about that, because like I said, I've been kind of following it. The kingdom that Texas is in, right, is called. There's like I don't know 4 or 5 kingdoms divided up in the United States. It's called I'm going to butcher the name, but it's Onsteora. Apparently, the International Space Station is a part of it, so that's pretty cool.
that's nuts.
Nice. That way, when we go up there for our podcast episode, we can stay in the same kingdom. I love it. See how this all comes together.
LARPing.
I can't wait for that episode.
Yeah.
All right. So
So
what's
there you
next on
go.
our hit parade here? We got people clawing at us, desiring more role playing.
Okay. So let's do a cherished NPC dies.
Okay.
Right.
I want to do the Busey. Um,
Okay.
what do you mean he's dead? Well, that's stupid. Why didn't he get a dodge? Did you even check his armor class? Whatever. I get his stuff.
Here you go. Oh, well, I loot the corpse.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
How
classic.
much gold does he have?
Yep. Those Buseys, man. So many players are just Buseys.
Mm-hmm. And
All right.
it's a little unfair.
How
I
would
made the Busey a metagamer as well, so and
yeah.
perhaps a little bit of a rules lawyer. Sorry, Gary.
That seems accurate.
How would Gary Sinise react to a cherished NPC dying?
Give it a go, Dave.
Oh, let's see here. Sorry, I'm getting hung up. I need to give this NPC a name.
His name is Terry.
Terry.
Terry's a lizard folk. He's been following the party around from town to town. He's always
Sure.
there at the tavern, sipping what's left over.
Don't worry, Terry. I will be with you.
With your tail in your mouth.
Well, it
Yeah,
did.
so I don't think that's a pass actually. I thought that was actually pretty good, right? Like you're in character, you're speaking in character, and you're talking, to the character in game. Like I think that's
Yeah.
a little better
For
than
this one, I took the liberty of assuming that he's been mortally wounded but hasn't
yeah,
passed
yeah,
yet.
sure.
Of course.
Choke,
His tail
choke
got
on it.
blown off by a cannon. Okay,
My
so
character's name was not Terry,
if we wanted to ramp this
and
up
he
a little
wasn't in the hallway with the cannon anymore. I was
hey man,
clearly planning on following everyone else into the room.
this is your bag of flour. Sorry to say, but
No, it's fair. I did. That was.
Okay, so if I wanted
I was a
to,
younger person who didn't handle those things nearly as an adult as I could have.
if I wanted to play into this, and this is probably going to be a little corny, a little overacting, but one of the things you do to role play well is role play physically, and it works much better face to face, obviously, than it does remotely. But even still, remotely, you move your arms, you breathe, you smile if your character is smiling, you frown if your character is frowning, and it comes through in the presence that you give, right? So, Terry's dead and I'm upset about it. So before I jump into the role play, I'm going to take a few breaths. I'm on mute to do that because it's just weird. I'm going to take a few breaths and kind of get worked up a little bit.
It's gonna be good.
Terry! God, no! Terry! Ah! Why didn't you get out of the way of that cannon? No! I don't know. It's a little corny, but the breath, I think, kind of makes that work.
That is this is you're actually onto something there with the breath. And this is actually something that plays into the guy that I train with, the method slash approach that he teaches is different from a lot of more traditional or more well known schools of acting thought. Because part of the core of what he teaches is when it comes to emotions, um, your body kind of remembers what an emotion feels like, and it's kind of backed up by studies. Um, a lot of your emotions express differently, but when it comes to how they physically feel in the body, um, they're all very much the same. Your heart rate's elevated. It's not too dissimilar to the way it feels when you've exerted yourself, whether through working out or because you know you don't work out and you had to do something mildly strenuous for 30 seconds, and now you're wheezing. Whatever it takes to make you, the listener, feel like you're out of breath. That kind of physical state matched with an emotion of your choosing, way to express that emotion. And
Yeah.
a good way to do it is kind of like almost mantra like, to take whatever emotion you're trying to convey. Let's say it's anger, and you kind of take a quick deep breath in, like, and just kind of repeat the emotion to yourself a few times. And so, yeah, like what Bob did, he kind of put himself on mute, he took a few deep breaths, and then he went for it. And that's a good way to approach it if you want to kind of like take that extra step and make the emotion you're trying to convey comes across.
Yeah, and again, I'm not going to say it's great, but it helps. It absolutely helps to kind of get
Yeah,
yourself in
it
that
does.
physical state as much as you can. Right? You don't want to scream, especially into a mic, because it does weird things when you peak your inputs. But yeah, you know, try to lean in when you have those opportunities, especially if you're a dungeon master and you're trying to do something with a character who's ultimately a throwaway character. You're not going to have a lot of opportunity to make them memorable. They're going to be here for this one fight or something and gone forever. So it's kind of your chance to leave a mark in that moment.
Yeah.
So speaking of the throwaway characters or the conflicts, what about the confrontation with the big bad? You've finally come to the bottom of the dungeon. You've finally found the Lich Zeraroth, who's holding the princess captive. Now's your chance to do that heroic thing that we see on TV.
Yeah, I'm gonna hit him with my sword.
Thank you, Gary. Yeah, dead on.
Yeah.
It's time to stab it.
All right, what's the next level up from that?
Let's see here. Let's see. The next step would be something like, "This is your blast moment. Take it in."
Yeah, because that works. You wanna? Yeah, I'll try the Oldman this time. I haven't done one.
All right.
Ah, Zeroth, you captured the princess. That didn't bother me. But look here, you son of a bitch. You killed Terry with your cannon. Terry was an alright guy. He had children, Zeroth. Children! That's all I got.
Nice.
That was good.
That's good. Yeah. So, I suppose we can't sit back and dish out this advice without a couple of caveats. And I don't know if you've seen it making the rounds on YouTube and Facebook or whatever, but there's a nice pan of Matt Mercer that's out there. The setup is this DM gets sent a clip for inspiration, and he like totally tries to take on the style, and he's doing Gary Oldman door openings, right? Like, and the players are not into it.
I think he's actually
Mercer,
doing Matt Mercer door openings in that case, right?
right? I was gonna say Mercer is Oldman all the time. Of course, he's on, right? He's on camera, so that makes complete
Yeah.
sense. But yeah, if everybody's not into it, just know when to back off, right? It's okay to say I go to the shop and I buy a sword because we're in a hurry and we want to get to whatever the next thing is. We don't have to role play out the complex encounter every single time.
Well,
Um,
we kind of talked about this a little bit the session 0 episode, right? Like, know what you're signing up for, right? Everyone should be kind of on the same page there, right? If everyone is expecting acting and you're not acting, then that's not really going to work out, right? But yeah, just set those expectations, right? But
that's right.
as a dungeon master, you should try and hit that level every single time. Recently, I had experience. My game my regular game fell through because some people were just kind of out. One person was sick, and so I grabbed Merkborg actually and played it with two people I regularly play with and two people, one who was remote that never met before, right? And a couple strikes against you, right? You don't know the person. They're not comfortable around you, right? They might not want to role play. Also, remote, right? If you're playing online, it's a little bit harder to get into it, You can't, at least for me, like feed off of the other players and the Dungeon Master's energy, right? Because you're not in the same. So yeah, but in this situation, I started strong, with the crazy character voices. They're bad. My acting's bad. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, right? Like it's not great, but you could be entertaining, and it brought everyone in. Every single player at the table was in character and role playing the entire session.
Exactly. Yeah, the DM has sort of this opportunity to set the tone and to nudge things in that direction. Now, if you're absolutely sure that your players are just not into it and you're making them uncomfortable, you can run kind of a flat game for them, at least for the rest of the night, and then sit down and talk about it after. But yeah, I mean, if the DM's not doing it, the players will stop. So yeah,
Mhm.
very, very good point.
And that's also, I mean, you don't have to do it all the time, right? Like maybe there's dramatic moments as the player that you wanted to do this, but if you're in the middle of combat, kind of just want the combat to be over, like maybe you don't narrate everything and say everything in character, right?
Yeah, definitely. And that's the other point I kind of wanted to add as well. Don't forget to ask for feedback as a player, as a dungeon master. Doesn't matter. Turn to someone and say, "What did you think of that? How did that go for you? What could I have done better? What could maybe I have not done?" Seek that out because it's the only way you're going to get better. You have a really difficult time judging your own work. Your voice doesn't even sound the same in your own head, for example. So ask that question. It's the only way you're going to continue.
Very true. Any final thoughts, anyone? Curveball, you weren't expecting it. Yes,
um,
and
I would say if you're looking for if you especially as a DM are looking for kind of a good gauge of when to like pull out the role playing and hopefully like engage your players, um, the times when you need to convey information are the biggest times to focus on, which, for me was always typically like, if they don't currently have a task, like especially like, first session, it's like, oh, they're going to meet the person that sets them on their initial quest, or like this is, and and it goes from there. When they meet, like, say, a big bad that they've been after or don't know they've been after for a while, it's like, oh, it's time for the reveal. Now's a good time for role playing and to see if we can like can your acting slash improv skills, kind of tweak the party and get their characters, riled up, which, if they can kind of prompt a reaction that just like pulls them in, and then it becomes something that nobody has to think about, because now you're just kind of responding naturally, as kind of you've been thinking about how your characters are dealing with this. And I have never been somebody who's tried to like role play the whole time. I do it in short little bursts and then spend the rest of my time kind of running MST3K style commentary.
Yeah. Yeah. Which works. Yeah. That's got its place
Yeah.
too.
Actually, another question for you, David. So you mentioned earlier that you had actual acting training,
Mm-hmm.
and you've gone to workshops. Is there anything that kind of the ordinary player or the dungeon master can do to kind of level up that acting, that role playing, a bit?
Some of the biggest, yes. Let me kind of gather my thoughts here and kind of try and sum these up as succinctly as possible. There are a couple of principles that they get slightly different terminology and phrasing from like style to style. But in general, specificity is your friend. That can mean everything from setting to if you're playing an NPC who's talking about, say, the big bad, kind of flesh out the details of that big bad beyond just they're the big bad. Like, you don't even necessarily need to relay all of that information to your players, but like you, the DM, know like how much trouble have they caused? Have they murdered people in the hundreds or thousands? That kind of specificity. Specificity is your friend. Um,
Yeah. And as a dungeon master,
no,
I'd point out really quick, you don't have to know that in advance. If you make it up on the spot, just write it out. Make a note.
yeah, very true. You can definitely like adapt to what your players are giving you on the fly and use that instead of being tied to having a whole bunch of details that you've come up with. The other thing is to a good way of putting this is what's called your objective. So like know what your know what the character know what you're trying to achieve with the character that you're playing. If it's you the player playing your character, that's a little bit easier. But as the DM, it's like that's a little bit harder per se, just because you've got multiple characters to juggle. But like know what you're trying to get it across, and hopefully it's a little bit more complex than just like, oh, they're the big bad, I want them to kill the players. um, you'll definitely have that, especially when you're talking monsters. It's like, oh, monsters come across the players, they're monsters, they're kind of mindless beasts in most cases, they're going to try and kill the party. That doesn't take a whole lot of work idea, but I probably lost it since I've been rambling about this. But yeah, those are the two biggest things. Oh, and you know what? Feel free to pick an emotion, and it doesn't always have to be, it doesn't always have to like be hand in hand with, say you're playing a murderous villain. That emotion doesn't have to be, say they don't have to be raging angry. They might be feeling mischievous,
Sure.
or
Yeah. I mean,
melancholy, or yeah, just
everybody has
Google
moods, right?
emotions and find something that fits to it. And also feel free to kind of vary up your also feel free to kind of play against, say, the surface motive of the character. um now that I don't know about that one. That one's a little bit easier when you're working with text. It's something that my coach calls colluding with the lines. You can kind of like look through, say, some text and see the way it's written, and it's like, oh, this is, the way this is written, this character is clearly angry. Well, like, well, the text clearly said, the text clearly points out that this person is angry. You don't need to like beat your audience over the head with it. that this person's angry. You can, throw another color in there in addition to what the lines already give you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm with you there. Yeah.
Yeah. Like trust that your players are smart. You don't have to beat them over the head with say information. Um, you don't also like if the lines you've come up with for your NPC are angry and ragey, you don't necessarily have to be in an angry ragey voice when you deliver it. Like they'll kind of get that from there, and that will kind of just some thoughts to think on.
Some good stuff. You gotta have me thinking on it a little bit more, right? Maybe this NPC is angry, but he's expressing himself as kind of like just tired and done with it, right?
Yeah. Like I literally was thinking along those same lines as you started saying that. Like a good example would be like, let's say your big bad is kind of like he's on a ragey kind of quest, but you can deliver his like ragey, like I'm gonna destroy everything lines, but maybe to some degree he's over it. It's like he's already assumed he's won. Maybe he comes across as a little bit bored or a little bit detached from it, and
Maybe he's
if
just
done right,
annoyed,
that could,
right?
yeah, maybe
He's
that,
annoyed
that's
these
like a,
adventurers are like, bugging them like every chance that he gets, and he just wants to be done with them, right? He
yeah,
doesn't even care about them. He wants in his way.
yeah, and a good way. One last tip when it comes to like finding like nailing down like an objective. Um, Try and phrase kind of what the main thing, whatever character you're role playing is after, especially as a DM. Um, Try and keep it that objective as simple as possible. Maybe it's just something as simple as like looking to hire adventurers. It doesn't have to be like you know doesn't have to be a small paragraph to like get the point across.
That's awesome. Well,
So, David, actually, one last thing before we kind of close things out here. Um, how do people support you? Right? Do you have a
Um,
Twitter, OnlyFans? Like, what's your jam?
no, like the COVID lockdown and whatnot hasn't driven me to an OnlyFans yet.
No,
Um, no.
we
Uh,
all we
if
all
you
have
if
our
you want to
line.
keep if you want to keep up with me, I'm on. I've got like some profession. I've got like a professional page
Hmm.
on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram. My handle on both is just my full name, David Jacob Lee. I'm on Twitter, but I don't use Twitter. Maybe there'll come a time where I actually use Twitter and I've got the same handle there. Um, and if you want to, I'd say the biggest way you can support me, not that I see anything from it, is I did one project a few years ago. It's called The Riot Act. You can find it on Amazon. I don't know if it's streaming on Amazon or you can at least buy it on Amazon. It was a movie I had the pleasure of being in. I'm in it for like 8 seconds, but they kept all my lines in it. It's something that I was paid to do, and it was a credit that got me eligible to join the Actors Union when that time comes. So it's kind of a nice little thing that's out of the way. It stars I always forget his name, the actor that played Bruce Wayne, or not Bruce Wayne, but why am I forgetting Bruce Wayne's dad's name? um,
That'd be Thomas Wayne.
yes, the actor that played Thomas Wayne in The Joker um, is the
oh,
lead in
okay.
this movie, and it's kind of a period piece set around like a Western opera house where his character seems to be haunted by um, the ghost of this man that may have that he may have killed, and he can't. Around him, it centers around this like opera house that he owns in this kind of semi-smallish town where it's a small enough town where he's kind of like the bigwig. He's the money in the town. And it's a nice little film.
That's awesome. Like I said, it's just cool to know somebody with an actual IMDb page. So I get to say that I knew you back when you played Earth Dawn. And listeners out there, please make David famous. It helps us all. Um, David, thank you so much for coming on the show tonight. It
Well, thanks
was
for inviting me. This was a blast.
great. Yeah, I had a lot of fun. Love talking about these topics. I could do it all night, but we do kind of have to keep these limited to some sort of reasonable limit.
Yeah, and
So,
thanks for
Sure.
joining us at a ridiculous hour from Istanbul.
Yeah, I
Not.
am halfway around the world at the moment. It is 6:30 a.m. in Istanbul.
There you go. When it's time
Not
for that coffee.
Constantinople.
It's not anymore, but I got to say, if you ever have the opportunity, I for various reasons am not taking the opportunity I normally would to kind of get out and sightsee. But what little I've seen, this is kind of a great country to come and explore. There's so much culture and history out here. I wish I could get out and see more of it, but for this trip, it's mostly just my hotel room.
Much to our advantage.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, I think that's a wrap on our podcast. Everybody out there in internet land, don't forget to become a member on our Patreon to take advantage of more great content. Come and join the conversation on Discord. You can find links to all of our stuff at rethinkgaming.com.
And remember, think, rethink, play.